Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to talk about the fear we can experience when approaching the blank page. Now I'm going to give you a bit of background here, so stick with me. You may or may not know that I'm the president of my university's writing club. So recently I was hosting a stall at a sign-up day as a way to recruit new members for the club. In order to make the stall a little bit more interesting, the vice president and I decided to run a competition, a flash fiction competition. So we decided to brainstorm a whole bunch of prompts, and we wrote these prompts out on little post-it cards and stuck them all over the table. And then we had another pad and pen for budding writers to write a response to. So all they had to do was pick out a prompt that spoke to them and write a tiny piece of flash fiction on the postcard.
And that was it. Those were the stakes.
We also decided to give away a prize just to add a little bit more incentive. And that prize was a free coffee voucher because, you know, we're writers. We love coffee. Now here's the really interesting thing. 40 people signed up for the writing group that day, but only 3 people actually entered the competition. Now don't get me wrong, many of the writers who approached our little stall were very interested in the competition. They read the prompts, then they sort of stood back. Their eyes would glaze over as they imagined the possible stories that they could write. But none of them, well, very few of them, actually picked up a pen and wrote a piece of fiction. Several times I picked up the pen and pad when I could see that they were interested, and I would slide it across the table towards them with words of encouragement. But unfortunately, this never really worked. In fact, most of the time they would take a step back and raise their hand like it was a shield because they were so embarrassed by the idea of even trying to write a short story. This same exchange then repeated for the next 2 hours, and I left that sign-up day having learned something very important. Writers are terrified of writing. Now don't get me wrong, I totally get that writing can be hard, because sometimes we feel like we don't really know what we're doing, and most of the time we don't really know what we're doing. But I never really thought about writing as being
scary.
So this kind of got me thinking about courage, and specifically the type of courage it can take to write a story. Now, many of these budding writers refused to participate in the competition because they were afraid that whatever they wrote wouldn't be good enough. They thought that I was going to judge them. Now, of course, I was going to judge the stories because it was a competition, but I wasn't judging them as a person. Naturally, this raises a whole bunch of questions around what is the role of the artist. When you're considering a piece of fiction, do you need to consider the artist when examining that work? And if so, to what extent? But I digress. Now, the thing that really baffled me, though, is that the stakes in this competition were so low. For instance, the competition was free. There was no entry fee. Now, if you've been in the writing game for a while, you'll know how incredibly rare this is. Most competitions, at the very least, cost a couple of bucks, and some can cost as much as $50. The other thing was the time. It was such a small competition that the amount of time you needed to invest to write your short story was maybe 5 minutes. Again, this is completely different to any other competition where in most cases you're writing to a theme of some sort. So in this way you have to actually prepare a work that suits the framework of that competition. Now here's the other thing. There was no entry form. I mean, seriously, your entry form was a post-it with your name on it and then your short story, and that's it. I mean, it could not have been easier. In addition to all of this, I tried to make entering the competition even easier by providing you with prompts so you didn't have the excuse of saying, "Oh, I don't know what to write." Because believe me, I fully understand how challenging it could be if someone's just like, "Write me a story." Because when there's no boundaries, when there's no direction given to you, it can become overwhelming because you can go anywhere and write anything. And this is why I provided prompts. But not only did I provide one prompt, we provided like 7, 10 prompts. So if one prompt didn't work for you, you could just pick another until you found one that actually sparked an idea. Now, even the length of the fiction was easy. You didn't have to try and fit a word count of 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 words. It was a piece of flash fiction. And flash fiction can be as short as a single sentence. And the bonus, of course, was that potentially you could win a cup of coffee.
And let's be honest, we all love our coffee.
Now, to be perfectly honest, I was actually quite amazed by how many people signed up that day. I did not think I would get 40 new members joining the club. And the crazy thing here is that if you're interested in joining a writing club, presumably you are open to the idea of having your work read by other people and critiquing the work of other people. So I was kind of confused about why you would want to join a club where people would be reading your work if even the idea of entering a tiny no-stakes competition made you quiver in your boots. Now, if you're a newbie writer, or maybe you're a little bit more seasoned, but you still cringe at the idea of having other people read your work, then I hope that these 4 tips might assist you. Now, the best way to overcome your fear of writing is, number 1, to know where to start. Now, one of the best ways to overcome your fear of writing is to have a starting point. You gotta know where you're starting from. As you already know from the story that I just shared, prompts are one of the best ways to get started if you're feeling tapped out of ideas. Now, of course, you can just hit up Google and type in creative writing prompts and you'll be met with about
100 million websites.
Or here's 2 of my favorites to get you started. I remember she opened the lid. Now, not knowing where to start can be totally paralyzing, but this is such a silly reason not to write. Not having an idea isn't really actually enough of a reason not to write, because I'm pretty sure you're capable of more than you think you are. Now, here's the thing. Writing isn't really writing. In many ways, writing is actually rewriting, or to put it more elegantly, revising. Now, of course, sometimes writing is incredibly fun, but sometimes writing can also be really uncomfortable. Writing can be hard, especially when the words just aren't flowing naturally and you're having to really work for every single sentence. And if you don't really know what's going to happen next. Now, please, I urge you to keep things in perspective. You're not trying to save the world with your book. In fact, a book is probably a very inefficient way to save the world because it takes so damn long to write one, let alone publish one. Now, I really, really hope that you're not adding the additional pressure to your writing to do something. I don't want you to use your writing as a vessel for external validation. I don't want you to go to your writing desk with the expectation that one day this book is going to win the Pulitzer Prize or be a bestseller. That is a lot of pressure to put on you and your writing. Really, you have to loosen up. It's totally okay to write something that doesn't work, to write something that is
Bad.
It's okay to write something that is not perfectly polished the first time it comes out. In fact, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get it right during the first draft. First drafts are supposed to be shit. That's why editing was invented. Now I'd sort of like to address the topic of being judged, because here's the thing. People will judge you, and that's totally okay. You judge people all the freaking time, and your life continues on just fine, as does theirs. Your work is going to be judged. It will be judged by your beta readers, your editors, your agent, your publisher, and your readers. If you get published, then you need to develop some strategies on how to deal with criticism and feedback. Now look, I get it. Sharing your work with people is
Scary.
but you need to focus on the positive. You don't actually know what impact your writing is going to have on other people. And you are incapable of seeing the faults in your own work. You're incapable of seeing your work accurately. The thing is, your work could be really good, But how will you know that if nobody ever reads it? And if your writing isn't that good, how are you going to know what needs fixing unless somebody tells you? Now, I'm going to be really straight with you here. Rejection is a part of life. So if you can't handle rejection, you need to develop ways to cope with this, or you need to accept the fact that you're just going to write privately and never publish your work.
How does that feel?
Are you okay with that? Maybe you are. But if you're not,
Then you really need to toughen up, Buttercup.
and find some strategies that can help you handle rejection, because this is a really important skill to develop, and frankly, it's just a reality if you're going to be an author, let alone a freelance writer. The way I see it is you can have 99 rejections and one hell yes, or you can have 0 of both. Now, my third tip that I want to mention is that you need to spend more time creating rather than consuming. If you're really struggling to think of anything to write, but yet you feel compelled to write, you want to write, perhaps the problem is that you're actually just not consuming enough content, or at least not enough of the right content. Now, one of the best ways to consume content that's going to support your writing aspirations is to read craft books. Now, here are some of my favorites. On Writing by Stephen King, Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, The Art of Zen by Ray Bradbury, The Writer's Room by Charlotte Wood, and Bird by Anne Lamott. If you have any books you'd like to recommend in this space, then please leave a comment below because I'd love to hear about them. Now, in general, it's a good idea to up your reading if you want to write, because let's be honest, the only apprenticeship for writing is reading. And it's quite important that you develop the ability to read as a writer. Look on the sentence line and try to decipher how the writer is doing what they are doing. What literary devices are they employing? And you can even take it a step further and sort of personalize this reading exercise. Make note of any interesting turns of phrases. Of course, you can also make note of words you haven't come across before in an effort to expand your own vocabulary. In fact, one of the best ways to develop your own writing ability is to take a beloved book, pick out a passage that you really enjoy, and literally write it out again. There is something about writing out those words that will teach you the mechanisms and the mechanics of that actual paragraph, and then you'll have a greater understanding of how it works, and ideally be able to mimic this tactic in your own writing. Another thing you can do is to read or watch interviews with authors you admire. In fact, my weekly newsletter includes a roundup of inspiring podcasts, videos, blogs, or articles that I have recently read and enjoyed and that I'm now recommending to others. Another thing you can do is to watch your favorite movie and to dissect the story. What happens when? How would you describe the characters or setting? And how does the narrative actually work? And what is surprising about the narrative? How has the author managed to throw you off the trail
And to surprise and delight you.
When you can add this critical analyzing to any of the works that you consume, you're going to get so much more out of the artwork, and you're going to be developing your own skills as a writer at the same time. Now, this tip is actually quite fun, and it's something I'm going to start doing more and more myself, and that's keeping an inspiration diary. So the idea here is that you're making a record of interesting articles, sights, sounds, objects, images, anything that you find particularly compelling. You could be walking down the street and you see a really interesting name on a cafe and it instantly conjures up an idea for you. Write that name down in your inspiration book because it may be fuel for you when you're writing your story down the track. You could also do this if you hear an interesting exchange of dialogue in a coffee shop, or if an interesting exchange of dialogue pops into your head, but it doesn't necessarily fit in with the story you're writing right now. Write it down in your inspiration book because it might actually be useful down the track, either in this work or in a different work. Now, the final thing you need to do to overcome your fear of writing is to just publish your work. So there's this strategy that is used by patients who are struggling with severe cases of OCD. Now, I'm not a doctor, and I couldn't be bothered Googling up the specifics of this actual strategy, so here's a really basic example. If a patient believes that they need to turn the doorknob 3 times after they lock the door before they leave the house, because if they don't, something bad will happen, this behavior is then taken by a therapist, and the patient is encouraged to force themselves to walk out the door and to not check the doorknob before they get in the car and leave their house.
So what happens then?
Literally nothing.
Nothing bad happens. And that's the whole idea of this strategy. You're trying to prove to yourself that the worst case scenario isn't actually gonna happen. Now, I urge you to do a similar tactic with your writing. Write a short story and post it on your blog or submit it to any one of the brilliant websites or blogs listed on the great writing resource, thegrinder.com. You could also consider posting a piece of flash fiction on your Instagram, or you could type up a piece of microfiction and tweet it. Now, I want you to really hear this. The sooner you publish your work, the better, because you'll realize how unimportant it is. Now, I don't mean to be harsh here. I'm just being honest. I love writing and I love words, and I think stories are incredibly powerful and awesome, and I'm proud to be a writer. But I also know that if I stopped writing today, the world would keep on turning without those stories. So there you have it, guys. Those are my 4 tips on how to handle your fear of writing and your fear of your writing being seen by other people. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Do you struggle with sharing your work? Do you feel afraid of the idea of somebody judging your stories? And if so, how do you overcome it? Or do you overcome it at all? Now, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the subscribe button or to give it a thumbs up to support this channel. If you'd like even more writing advice, you can head to my website, taraeast.com. There are over 150 blogs on the website, so I'm sure you'll find something there that will suit your needs. Now, while you're there, be sure to join my email newsletter, because when you do, I'll send you a downloadable cheat sheet called the 7 Ways to Stay Motivated as a Writer. It's a single page. You can print it out and stick it anywhere in your house that you fancy for those moments when you need a little bit of extra inspiration. You can also find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and of course, Instagram. Thank you so much for watching again, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next week. Now go get some writing done.